In this chapter, we will look at some of key facts about international trade. Then start evaluating international trade using comparative advantage. We're also going to use the demand and supply curve to explain how countries determine which good they will import, which good they will export. The price that is charged for the good. And then we'll conclude with some of the barriers and how those barriers impact the outcome of international trade. Okay, quick, the content of the chapter, economy basis for international trade, supply and demand analysis of exports and import, trade barriers, and export subsidies. And at the end of the chapter, there's a good illustration using the case for protectionism. And also, we will look at some of the multilateral trade agreement and the free trade zones. So some key facts about international trade. So you will see that the US trade deficit in goods is 891 billion in 2018. But US have a surplus. We say deficit in goods, but we do have a trade surplus in services. And Canada is our largest trade partner, and we have also Mexico. So international trade is a key component in most nation economy. It's one of the factors that allow a country economy to grow. Right? Without international trade, a nation might not have access to key resources, right? Or might not be able to exchange its own key resources with other countries or other resources that is needed. In one sense, the US was a fund on the basis of international trade as Christopher Columbus left his home country in the search of a new market, right? New trading partner. Right? So the idea is to engage in international trade. Cool. Canada, again, is our US largest trading partner, given the fact that Canada is the next to US and that we share a lengthy border. Trade deficit with China has been decreasing in the recent year as the China economy grows, providing Chinese with more disposable income to be able to purchase imported goods from US. Principal US export. The principal US export reflect the fact that we have more skilled workforce, right? And also a very thriving agricultural industry. Frequently, US is referred to as the breadbasket of the world due to U.S. ability to produce crops such as wheat and corn. So U.S. provide about 8.5% of the world export. The principles U.S. import. So one thing is interesting to note that U.S. import some of the same product that U.S. export. Right. And in today's economy, most goods that involve basic manual labor are made in a country that have excess labor, a country that have a lesser skilled workforce. Basic manual labor such as clothing and anything that is basic skill you want to make it in the country that have a less skilled labor force. So this global perspective illustrates the largest export nation in the world as of 2018. Economy basis for trade. Why trade? Why a nation had to engage in international trade? The reason is that nation as well as individual can get by specializing themselves. With trade, every country end up better than before. And the benefit of trade are derived from three facts. The first one being the distribution of natural, human, and capital resources is uneven among nations. Some have better resources, some have less resources. And the second fact is that not all nations have the same degree of technology. The US have capital societies, capital oriented, have more technology than other countries, and vice versa. The third fact is that people have different preferences. In a country such as China, for instance, which has an abundant supply of cheap labor, producing labor-intensive good makes sense. Other country may be blessed with abundance of natural resources, like land, Mexico, for instance. So it may make sense to produce a land-intensive good in those countries efficiently. And this industrially advanced nation, like the US, can produce goods that require large amount of capital at a low cost. So as countries evolve, the economy will also evolve and change. Countries that once focused on labor-intensive good may now move toward more capital-intensive good. So, assumption and opportunity cost ratio. Comparative advantage, we have absolute advantage and comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is used to explain the relationship between specialization and international trade. A nation does not have to have absolute advantage in producing a good to benefit from trading, right? Absolute advantage exists when one nation is the most efficient producer of a good or service, meaning that the nation can produce the good at lowest possible cost, lower possible price. But under comparative advantage, the country can produce the good at a lower opportunity cost. Right? So it's two different things. The first one, absolute advantage, means that it can produce the good at the lowest possible price, right? Produce it efficiently at lower possible price. But under comparative advantage, a country can produce the good at a lower opportunity cost. And opportunity cost is what must be given out, or what must be given up to produce the good. So in our analysis, we will look at two nations with a similarity, right? We'll use the example of a United States and Mexico and assume that the United States being bigger, have a bigger economy, have an absolute advantage over Mexico in producing the two good in our analysis. So in this analysis, we assume two nations, United States and Mexico, same size labor force. They all have a constant cost, and with different costs between the country. Right? And United States has absolute advantage in the production of both goods. Okay, so if look at the two production possibility curve, it's that they illustrate the relationship between vegetable and beef, right? And one for United States, we have a bigger economy, and the one on your right is for Mexico. So for United States, if the country produce 12 tons of vegetable, right, 12 tons of vegetable, they can only produce, right, 18 tons of beef to be on the production possibility curve. Right, so if the United States decide to increase the production of a vegetable to 15, right? So by increasing it to 15, they had to give away the production of beef. They can only produce now 15 tons of beef. In Mexico, the number are smaller, right, due to the size of the economy. So if Mexico produce 4 tons of vegetable, then they can only produce 8 tons of beef. To produce more beef, a country must produce less of vegetable, and vice versa. Comparative advantage. If each country is isolated and self-sufficient, each must decide what mix of vegetable and beef a desire to produce, with in mind that to produce more of a particular a good, you had to produce less of the other good. Right? In our case, beef, to produce more of beef, you had to produce less of of vegetable due to the resources that you have. Mexico has a higher opportunity cost, as Mexico must give up 2 pounds of vegetable for every pound of beef, while United States, the ratio is 1 to 1 when we look at the production possibility curve. So this table illustrates or lists the international specialization according to comparative advantage and the gain from a trade for Mexico and United States. So you have the two countries here. You had the output before they specialized themselves. And we look at the production possibility curve, 18 tons with beef and 12 tons of vegetable. And Mexico is 8 tons of beef and 4 tons of vegetable. When they specialize themselves in the production of a particular good, we see that United States produce more beef, and Mexico just specializes in the production of vegetable. So the column 3 show you the amount exported, right? They produce the assets to export it and import it, right? As exported being the minus. So you can see that United States producing excess beef. They have 10 tons, right, that they exported, and 15 tons of vegetable that they imported, right? And Mexico will import 10 tons of beef, exported 15. So there's a change between United States and Mexico. And here are the output available for after trade, output available after trade. And the last column show you just again from the fact that the country decide to specialize themselves in the production of the good that they have advantage to produce. In summary, we found that United States has a comparative advantage with beef, while Mexico has a comparative advantage when it comes to vegetable, because Mexico can produce the vegetable by giving up less, right? And United States can produce more beef by giving up less vegetable. So the comparative advantage, the opportunity cost for United States to produce beef is less. So it's good. It makes sense that United States produce beef, more beef, and trade it with Mexico. On the other end, Mexico have that comparative advantage with vegetable that the opportunity cost to produce vegetable in Mexico is less. So it makes more sense that Mexico produce, specialize itself in the production of vegetable and export the excess to United States or trade it with the United States. And here, since the United States can produce beef for less than Mexico, it makes sense that the United States produce beef and trade with Mexico for vegetable. And Mexico having a comparative advantage in vegetable. As Mexico will had to sacrifice 1/2 ton of beef to get 1 ton of a vegetable. And for United States, the ratio is 1-to-1, 1 ton of beef to 1 ton of vegetable. And to that point, you'll see that both nations will benefit as they work out the term of the trade. United States would end up with more than 1 ton of vegetable for 1 ton of beef. And Mexico will get more than 1/2 ton of beef for each ton of vegetable. Gains from trade. Trading possibility line show that both countries end up better with trade. So with comparative advantage, the nation have complete specialization in which each nation only produce the good that it has the comparative advantage in, and then import all the other good for which it has a comparative disadvantage. Right, so it will be good to specialize yourself in the good that you have a comparative advantage of, and import the good that the country have a comparative disadvantage on. So we're going to look at it on the graph. So you can see that in these two graphs, the maximum production line of each country, United States and Mexico, has rotated outward, right? The original production possibility line. Now with the trade, you see that the attainable area is greater than before the trade. Looking at the trading possibility line, the original one, right? The production possibility line and the trading possibility line. So the trading possibility line rotated outward, giving the country more attainable area. So the economic growth. And if you look at Mexico also, Mexico attainable area also expand compared to before the trade. Well, we were using a very simple example of two product and two country. The review will be the same for any number of product and country, right? In real world, we are also faced with a concave production possibility curve instead of the linear one that we show in our analysis. This means that there are increasing opportunity costs in the real world. And at some point, the underlying basis for further specialization and trade disappear. So both countries end up producing some of both product. This is why you see that country export or import the same product that they export or that they produce. Now we're going to shift to the supply and demand analysis. So if we apply supply and the demand review to see how equilibrium price and quantity of import and export are determined, the amount that a nation import or export for a particular good depend on the difference between the equilibrium world price and the equilibrium domestic price. So it is assumed that when the countries start to trade, the domestic price will either rise or fall to the world price level. The equilibrium domestic price is the price that will prevail in a closed economy, rather do not engage in any trade. So when the world equilibrium price is above the domestic equilibrium price, there is an export surplus, as a supplier produce more than the amount demanded by the domestic economy, and then export the surplus to receive or take advantage of the higher world price. And if the world equilibrium price is less than the domestic equilibrium price, the opposite effect will happen. So US export supply and import demand. So let's see the illustration with these two graphs over here. So we see the effect of differences between the world price and the domestic equilibrium price. Here, if we have the domestic equilibrium price at $1 per pound, right, and the quantity is 100. If the world price, let's say the world price, this is equilibrium domestic price, $1. If the world price is set at $1.25, what the domestic producer will do, the domestic producer will produce 125. So if you project it to the supply curve, you project it back to the quantity of aluminum supply, you will see that at the price level of 1.25, right, the domestic producer will produce 125 million pounds of aluminum, which will create a surplus because the domestic demand is 75. So the gap between 125 and 75, which is 50, represent the surplus. They have a surplus of 50 million pounds of aluminum over the domestic demand. And this surplus will be exported and sold at a higher price, 120.25, which is above the domestic plug price of $1 in our case here. So this will be a surplus, and United States will export the surplus, and at the at a higher price. For the price below the domestic equilibrium price, United States will have a shortage, right? In this case over here, if it's 0.75, we have a shortage and will import aluminum equivalent to the size of this shortage from other countries. So doing this at each price for the supply and the demand, the U.S., this section will represent the U.S. imported demand, and the supply section gonna represent the U.S. export supply. So you have the supply and you have the demand here for the U.S. So if we do it for the other nation as well, so this graph illustrates the same thing for Canada, right? So here we switch from United States to Canada and to have the same illustration. So again, the domestic price being at 75.75 and the quantity produced is 100. Right? So if the world price is $1, you see that the domestic supplier gonna supply more and the demand is less, so that creates a surplus, right? That creates a surplus. Anything above the domestic, whatever the world price is above the domestic price, that's gonna create a surplus that the country can export. And if the world price is less than the domestic price, it will create a shortage, right? So it's this segment of the demand gonna represent the import demand for Canada, and it's actually gonna represent the export supply for Canada. So now let's go to the next one when we bring both of them together. So import demand equal export supply. Now we can see that by combining the two countries, the Canada and the US, into one single analysis to determine the world price, if we combine the US export surplus, right, the US export surplus, and import demand with Canada export surplus and Canada import demand, we found a equilibrium point where one country, here Canada, export supply intersect with the other country, the US, import demand, right, which is at this point. And in this example, you can see that that equilibrium occur at 0.88, right after a trade, which is less than $1 for US, but more than 0.75 for Canada. So you see that everybody take advantage, benefit from the trade. The trade barrier and export subsidies. Even though a nation gains from trade as a whole, some domestic industry may be hurt or could be hurt by trade. And some industry may need to be maintained even if they are not cost effective for reasons such as national security, national defense, and other things. So tariff, one of the most common trade barrier. Right? A tariff is what? A tariff is an excise tax on the dollar value of on the dollar value or the quantity of an imported good. So the tariff revenue apply to a good that is typically not produced in a domestic country. And we will see how the tariff revenue accrue. And they are designed to raise enough money to raise revenue for domestic government. And tariff revenue tend to be fairly low. We have also the protective tariff. And what is protective tariff? Is they apply to goods that do have a domestic competitor. Right? And is the aim of a protective tariff is to make the imported good cost much or cost at least as much of the domestic produced good. We have also import quota. Import quota, another common barrier for trade. And a quota is a limit on the amount of a particular good that can be imported in a given time period. So the idea is by limiting the supply, you drive the price up, right? Thereby making the imported good more expensive than as a domestic competitor. The non-traffic barrier, a non-traffic barrier can include things such as require extensive documentation for imported good, right? Restricting the location available to receive those imported goods, or basically having unreasonable standard for the imported good, make it difficult to get a good in. And we have also the voluntary export restriction. Right? Voluntary export restriction is when foreign firm voluntarily agree to limit the amount of the export to a particular country. Okay, and the export subsidy consists of government payment to a domestic producer to produce more and export goods. And the export subsidy are designed to help that producer by reducing the cost of producing the good. And doing so, it will enable the producer to compete more efficiently against imported good. So we see some illustration of that as well. So here, this graph illustrates the effect of a traffic or a quota on domestic supply and demand. So at the world price, there's a a shortage in the market, right? That is equivalent to AD. Right? If you world price, if you project it, so that's the demand and the supply, right? So you can see that there's a shortage, which is this gap over here, and this shortage will be solved with import, right? Equivalent to AD. When a tariff is placed on the good, the price increases and the quantity produced by domestic firm also will rise. So the price will increase. And the quantity produced will rise from A to B. So while the quantity demanded, right? The quantity demanded, what's going to happen to the quantity demanded to be D? Now the quantity demanded will fall. So to that point, you see that the shortage that we showed before, AD, now shrank to BC. Right? The foreign producer will continue to receive the world price. The quota has essentially the same effect, except that the higher price is now received by the foreign firm. Note here that this yellow area reflects the additional revenue that under a tariff will go to the government, but under the quota, this will go to the foreign producer. Economic impact of tariffs. Because tariffs are the most commonly used trade barrier, we will look closer at the economic impact. A direct impact of a tariff include a decline in domestic consumption as the desired goods are now at a higher price than consumers are willing to pay. An increase in domestic production as a supplier will be able to receive a higher price for the good. But you have a decline in import, which is the whole point of imposing the tariff at the first place. So the tariff revenue will accrue to domestic government. The tariff also have an indirect effect beyond the basic supply and the demand concept. Since the foreign country supplying the import will sell less, the economy will decline, right? And if they imported any product from our domestic country, those will decline as well. So the tariff also, to some extent, will subsidize inefficient producer, right? It will shield inefficient producer. So equal to inefficient allocation of resources, right? And that can drain the economy. Economic impact of quota. Quota have matched the same effort as a tariff, right? With the major difference being the quota do not generate any government revenue. Right? With a tariff, the government could use the revenue collected to compensate firm and individual who have been adversely affected by international trade. But with a quota, the excess revenue provided accrue to the foreign producer, right, not the domestic government. This case for protection when there are many arguments used to support the use of trade barrier, one of them being military self-sufficiency, right? Protecting infant industry, protecting the country economy against dumping, right? And what is a dumping? Dumping is it's a big problem, and dumping happens when a foreign firm deliberately, right, sell a good below their cost, right, in attempt to drive the domestic industry out of business. And once the domestic industry are out of business, the foreign firm is then free to raise the price to whatever level they desire. Right. And a dumping is considered as unfair trade practice. And consequently, a sanction can be imposed against a country or firm involved in the dumping. So now the rest, we're just going to review some of the multilateral trade agreement. Right? Let's start with the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, the GATT. And we have also the World Trade Organization, WTO, European Union, EU, and North American Free Trade Agreement in NAFTA. So the GATT, first signed in 1947 by 23 nations, right, including the United States. The purpose was to provide a forum for multilateral negotiation to reduce trade barriers. Since then, thousands of tariff on thousands of products have been reduced or eliminated. Right, we forgot overall we see a decrease in overall tariff by 33%. So we have the World Trade Organization, WTO, is the largest organization devoted to promoting international trade. The current round of negotiation began in 2001 in the Qatar, Doha, Qatar, and I aim to at further reducing tariff and quota as well as agricultural subsidies that can distort the trade. And there are some critics on the WTO, and critics are concerned that WTO may supersede the authority of a member nation to protect its own environment and workers, allowing firms to move to other countries with a less restrictive law. And proponents respond that these concerns are outside of the scope of a WTO. So we have also European Union, initiated in 1958. Currently have 28 member nations. EU is one of the most dramatic example of a free trade zone. In addition to eliminating mostly ultra tariff and quota between member nations, it has also liberalized a movement of capital and labor within European Union. There was also introduction of euro currency in the early 2000s, which have been adopted by 19 of European Union member nations by 2015. And that enabled those nations to improve their standard of living by making it easier to price and sell their product across Eurozone. NAFTA, the agreement between United States, Canada, and Mexico, established a free trade zone between the country. So far, time has proven the critic of NAFTA wrong. Since NAFTA was enacted in 1993, over 25 million of jobs have been created in the United States. And a trade among the three nations has also increased. So the standard of living in each nation. In late 2018, negotiations were completed to update NAFTA with a new treaty called United States Mexico Canada Agreement, USMCA. But the treaty still had to be approved by Congress. Yeah, some of the assistance helping those hurt by free trade. So the Trade Adjustment Assistance Act of 2002 introduced some innovative policy designed to help those workers who have been displaced by international trade. The act provides financial assistance beyond unemployment benefit, relocation allowances, and retraining services. Critics argue that helping one small section of the worker is not fair. to other workers who also end up or lost their job for a variety of reasons. So let's conclude the lecture by the petition of the candle makers of 1845. The French economist Frédéric Bastiat argued that the lawmaker must impede the power of the sun in order to increase the production of candles. And this was used to show protectionists the inefficient argument and conclusion that are associated with trade protection.